hollows of Appalachia, where the fog clings to the trees and the silence feels alive. There are stories that even the bravest locals refuse to tell after dark. One of the most unsettling among them is the legend of the Dalton Clan. Families so perverse, so twisted in their ways, that their name became forbidden, whispered only when warnings had to be given. They weren't hunters, they weren't farmers, they were parasites, feeding on others and leaving nothing but fear and bones in their wake. The Daltons first appeared in county records in the late 1800s, settling along a stretch of wilderness, near a place the locals came to call Widow's Creek. They were poor, isolated, and secretive. While most mountain families struggled to survive, the Daltons seemed to thrive in their own way. But their prosperity wasn't born of honest work, it was built on something darker. Travelers spoke of Dalton men lurking near the creek, watching, with pale, hungry eyes. Farmers whispered of livestock vanishing without a sound. Soon enough, the stories shifted from stolen cattle to missing people. What made the Dalton legend stand out wasn't just the cannibalism, it was the grotesque perversity of their rituals. Survivors few and far between spoke of being kept alive 4 days, tormented by laughter and strange songs, sung in the dead of night. The Daltons didn't just kill, they toyed with their victims, twisting pain into ceremony. They were said to build crude wooden stages deep in the woods, where they reenacted their own family plays. Each performance ended the same way, with a victim bound, dismembered, and consumed before an audience of kin. Clapping and howling like animals, the patriarch, Elias Dalton, was a figure of particular horror. Described as a massive man with a beard matted in blood, Elias was known to wear a necklace of fingers, his trophies from the lives he had taken. He enforced loyalty among his kin through fear and ritual, ensuring no Dalton ever left the hollow. Outsiders who encountered him described his eyes as dead and glassy, a man more beast than human, driven by urges too foul to imagine. The children born of generations of inbreeding carried visible deformities, jaws jutting forward, twisted limbs, skin marked with lesions and scars. But worse than their appearance was their behavior. Locals told of Dalton children luring outsiders with laughter or cries for help, only to drag them screaming into the trees. Some said they moved like feral animals, crawling on all fours, their nails sharpened to claws. By the early 1900s, the Dalton name had already become synonymous with evil. Families living near Widow's Creek warned their children never to stray too far, especially after sunset. "The Daltons will take you," they'd whisper, "and you'll never come back." It wasn't just superstition. Missing persons reports grew in alarming numbers, and the woods near the Dalton land became a place of dread. In 1912, a group of hunters claimed to have stumbled across a Dalton gathering by accident. They described a clearing lit by torches, the Daltons chanting as they circled a woman tied to a wooden frame. Before the hunters could act, Elias himself stepped from the shadows, grinning wide, his mouth stained with blood. The hunters fled, but one never made it out. His body was later found on the banks of Widow's Creek, his chest cavity hollowed out, his eyes missing. What made the Daltons even more terrifying was their ability to erase evidence. They never left bodies intact. Victims were stripped to the bone, the remains boiled down, the bones scattered in the creek. The water of Widow's Creek was said to run red at times, carrying bits of flesh and marrow downstream. Law enforcement tried more than once to flush them out. Deputies raided the hollow in the 1920s, but returned shaken, claiming the Daltons had vanished into the woods, leaving only effigies of bone and crude symbols carved into trees. Locals believed the Daltons had a network of caves and tunnels, places only they knew, where they could disappear in an instant. But the most horrifying part of the Dalton legacy wasn't what they did to outsiders, it was what they did to themselves. Stories surfaced of children forced to participate in the plays, cutting into captives while their parents laughed. Women were said to have been treated as little more than breeding stock, passed from brother to cousin to father in a cycle. of abuse that warped the bloodline beyond recognition. By the mid-20th century, the Daltons weren't fully human anymore. Their bodies twisted, their minds corrupted, their family tree rotten to the root. Even today, Widow's Creek is avoided. Locals won't drink from it, won't camp near it, and won't even speak the Dalton name unless pressed. But sometimes, when the wind is right, you can hear it, the sound of laughter echoing from the hollow. Laughter too shrill and cruel to be human, and if you follow that sound, if you step too close to Widow's Creek, you may find the Daltons waiting, still playing their games, still feeding, still passing down their perverse legacy from one generation to the next. Because the Daltons don't just eat flesh, they savor fear. And in the silence of Appalachia, fear echoes louder than screams. By the 1940s, the Dalton name had become a curse in the mountain counties of Appalachia. Folks living near Widow's Creek didn't just avoid the land, they swore that anyone who trespassed there was marked. The few who dared to cross into Dalton territory rarely returned, and those who did came back broken, their eyes wide with terror, their stories too grotesque to believe. One such survivor was a drifter named Harold Briggs. He stumbled into Widow's Creek during the winter of 1946, claiming he had been looking for shelter when the Daltons found him. According to Briggs, they didn't kill him right away. Instead, they dragged him into their settlement, a cluster of rotting cabins hidden deep in the hollow, where the smell of death clung to the air. Briggs described rooms stacked with bones, crude furniture carved from human remains, and altars decorated with faces peeled from the dead. But the worst thing he remembered was the theater. Briggs swore the Daltons had constructed a stage from split logs and bones, where they performed their twisted plays. He recalled being forced to sit with other captives as the family acted out disturbing rituals, mock weddings between siblings, grotesque parodies of childbirth, and feasts where victims were dismembered before the audience. The performers painted themselves with blood, danced in spirals, and chanted in a language that Briggs couldn't understand. He escaped only when a fight broke out among the Daltons themselves, slipping into the woods and never looking back. Most folks dismissed Briggs's account as the ramblings of a drunk, but some of his details matched older rumors. The spiral carvings on trees, the torches burning late into the night, the laughter that seemed to carry for miles. And when a search party ventured into Widow's Creek a year later, they found a stage just as Briggs had described. No bodies, no captives, just dried blood staining the wood and bones scattered in the dirt. The 1950s brought the first serious attempt to eradicate the Dalton Clan. Sheriff Marcus Hensley, a war veteran hardened by combat, organized a posse to storm the hollow. Armed with rifles and lanterns, they marched into Widow's Creek one autumn night, determined to put an end to the stories. But the Daltons were waiting. According to the sheriff's surviving deputies, the clan had set traps throughout the wood-spiked pits, swinging logs studded with nails, and sharpened stakes buried under leaves. The posse stumbled right into the ambush. Gunfire echoed through the trees, and lanterns were shattered as figures moved in the dark, shrieking with laughter. By dawn, 6 men were missing, and the survivors described hearing screams long after they fled the hollow. Sheriff Hensley himself vanished. His badge was later found nailed to a tree, a crude spiral carved into the wood beneath it. After that night, the county authorities quietly stopped their efforts. Official reports claimed the sheriff had died in the line of duty, but locals knew the truth. The Daltons couldn't be fought like normal people. They weren't just hiding, they were thriving, feeding, and multiplying in the shadows. By the 1960s, the Dalton Clan had become the stuff of nightmares. Children in nearby towns told each other stories about the bone men who would come to take them away if they disobeyed. Farmers reported livestock gutted and left hanging in trees, their blood drained into crude wooden bowls. Campers disappeared without a trace, their campsites left eerily untouched except for spirals, carved into nearby rocks. But the strangest rumors came from those who claimed the Daltons had taken their rituals even further. Witnesses spoke of bride feasts, where young Dalton women, grotesquely deformed from inbreeding, were forced into mock marriages with their kin. Outsiders unlucky enough to stumble across the ceremony were sacrificed, sometimes as gifts for the bride, other times as meals for the family. These rituals blurred the line between survival and sadism, creating a cycle of depravity that seemed to have no end. In 1967, a pair of college students from Ohio vanished near Widow's Creek. Their car was found abandoned on a dirt road, the windshield cracked, spirals etched into the hood with what looked like blood. Weeks later, hunters discovered one of the students, what was left of him, hanging in the trees. His body had been flayed, his insides scooped out, his skin covered, and spirals drawn with ash. The second student was never found. The FBI briefly opened an investigation, but they too withdrew after agents reported being stalked through the woods by figures that seemed to vanish whenever they were cornered. The official reports cited hostile terrain and uncooperative locals as reasons for abandoning the case. Off the record, one agent allegedly confessed that Widow's Creek felt cursed by the 1970s. The Dalton legend had grown into a living nightmare. Tourists were warned to stay away. Locals stopped venturing into the woods entirely. Yet, despite their isolation, the Daltons seemed to know what was happening beyond the hollow. Survivors claimed the clan collected newspapers, stealing them from mailboxes and using them to track what was happening in the world outside. Some whispered that Elias Dalton's descendants spoke openly about waiting for the end of days, when the outside world would collapse and the Daltons would rise from Widow's Creek to reclaim what was theirs. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't just hunger. The Daltons were preparing, and as the decades rolled on, their perverse rituals grew stranger, their legacy darker, and their hunger more insatiable. By the 1980s, the Dalton clan was less of a family and more of a legend, a whispered warning passed down like folklore. But unlike most ghost stories, there was always fresh evidence to keep the fear alive. Campers went missing, hikers disappeared, and every few years, someone stumbled out of the hollows with a story too horrific to ignore. One of the most infamous incidents happened in 1983, when two spelunkers from Kentucky entered a cave system near Widow's Creek. They never returned. Weeks later, rescue teams ventured deep into the caverns and found something out of a nightmare. Carved into the stone walls were spirals, hundreds of them painted with what looked like dried blood. Bones littered the cave floor, many of them human. In the deepest chamber, rescuers discovered crude beds made of animal hides and hair, along with broken lanterns and rusted knives. It was clear the Daltons had not only lived in those caves, but thrived in them. One rescuer claimed to have heard movement in the darkness, footsteps too fast, too deliberate to belong to any animal. When his flashlight caught the edge of the chamber, he swore he saw pale figures retreating into the tunnels, their eyes glinting in the light before vanishing. The team left quickly after that, sealing off the cave entrance. But locals say the seal never lasted. The Daltons always found new ways in and out. By the 1990s, the legend of the Daltons attracted a new kind of curiosity: urban explorers and thrill-seekers. Some came with cameras, hoping to prove the clan was real. Few came back. One group of college students filmed themselves hiking into Widow's Creek in 1995. Their camcorder was later found in the woods. The tape inside cracked, but partially watchable. The footage showed the group laughing as they carved their names into a tree, only to go silent when they noticed fresh spirals etched beneath their carvings. Later clips showed them walking faster, whispering about hearing laughter in the woods. The final frames captured a pair of glowing eyes, reflecting the camera light before the screen went dark. None of the students were ever seen again. The Dalton legend grew darker still in the 2000s, when hikers began reporting strange effigies hanging from trees, figures made of sticks, bones, and strips of human skin. Local hunters discovered mutilated deer left as offerings, their carcasses arranged in spirals, and in 2008, a construction crew working near Widow's Creek uncovered a shallow grave filled with dozens of bones, some cracked open to extract marrow. DNA testing confirmed several of the bones belonged to missing persons from the past 50 years. Authorities quietly buried the evidence, fearing panic. But the truth leaked out through whispers. Survivors continued to emerge, though rarely. One man, a truck driver, who claimed he broke down near Widow's Creek in 2011, said he was stalked for 2 nights by figures that crawled on all fours, circling his truck, scratching the metal with long nails. He described hearing children laughing outside his window, only to look out and see malformed faces peering back at him. Their teeth jagged, their skin pale and stretched. He drove away with his windshield smashed, convinced he was seconds from being dragged into the woods. But perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence came in 2017, when drone footage surfaced online. A group of explorers sent a drone into the forest around Widow's Creek, hoping to capture overhead shots of the abandoned cabins rumored to still exist. The footage was grainy, but viewers swear it showed movement figures darting between trees, their bodies unnaturally thin, their movements erratic. In one frame, a cluster of pale faces could be seen staring up at the drone before the feed cut out entirely. The explorers claimed the drone was struck out of the air. They never retrieved it. Today, Widow's Creek remains abandoned, its land untouched by developers, avoided by locals, and feared by outsiders. The Daltons are said to still dwell in the caves and cabins, their numbers fewer, but no less terrifying. Generations of inbreeding have warped them beyond recognition, but their hunger, their rituals, and their perversity remain unchanged. They are not a relic of the past, they are an infection of the present. What makes the Dalton story so terrifying isn't just their cruelty or their cannibalism, it's their persistence. Families die, names fade, legends weaken, but the Daltons, they endure. They've been seen in every decade, leaving trails of bones and spirals as proof of their existence. And if you stand near Widow's Creek today, in the silence of night, some say you can still hear it, the faint sound of children giggling, of bones knocking together like wind chimes, of footsteps moving just beyond the tree line. The Daltons are still there. They always have been. The hidden legacy of the Dalton clan is that evil doesn't vanish. It doesn't fade with time. It adapts. It waits. And in the hollows of Appalachia, some families are too twisted, too perverse, and too hungry to ever truly die. The Dalton clan were never just a family. They were a disease and infection of cruelty, hunger, and ritual that spread from generation to generation. And while most families fade into history, the Daltons endured. They adapted. They learned to vanish when the world came looking, which is why some believe they're still here, still hiding in the caves near Widow's Creek, still laughing in the dark, still waiting for the next outsider to wander too far into their hollow. But the Daltons are only one nightmare in Appalachia. There are other families, other bloodlines, each with secrets, more twisted, more terrifying, and more unforgettable. So if you want to keep exploring Appalachia's darkest legends, hit subscribe, ring the bell, and drop a comment below. Would you step foot near Widow's Creek, or would you never dare test the Daltons' hunger? And remember, in Appalachia, families don't always die out. Sometimes, they just go deeper underground.